You watch as incompetent leaders rise, while capable people remain powerless, wondering why merit seems irrelevant in the game of influence. Every day you witness those who understand power's dark psychology manipulate situations effortlessly, while honest individuals struggle for recognition and respect. I am Niccolò Machiavelli, the Florentine who spent my life studying power in its rawest form, during the brutal politics of Renaissance Italy, where one wrong move meant exile or death. What I discovered about the dark psychology of power will transform how you understand influence, revealing why some people effortlessly command respect while others remain invisible despite their talents. The same principles that determined who ruled Florence and who faced the executioner's block still govern every boardroom, organization, and relationship today. But first, like this video, subscribe for more dangerous wisdom, and comment below where you're watching from. I want to know which corner of the world is ready to understand power's true nature. I was born into chaos, though at the time I thought it was civilization. Florence in 1469 was a city where merchant families wielded more power than kings, where a single misjudgment could mean exile or death, and where the gap between public virtue and private calculation was so vast it could swallow entire dynasties. My education in power began not in classrooms, but in watching the Medici rise, fall, and rise again through the sheer force of understanding human nature. When I was 9 years old, I witnessed something that would shape my understanding of power forever. The Pazzi conspiracy attempted to murder Lorenzo de' Medici during Easter Mass at the cathedral. They succeeded in killing his brother, Giuliano, but Lorenzo escaped. What happened next taught me the first rule of power. Mercy to enemies is cruelty to yourself. Lorenzo didn't just punish the conspirators, he displayed their bodies throughout the city as a message. The Pazzi family name was banned. Their symbols were erased from every building. This wasn't vengeance. It was strategic terror designed to prevent future challenges. I watched honest men like Girolamo Savonarola attempt to rule through moral purity and religious fervor. For 4 years, he held Florence in his grip through passionate sermons about virtue and divine judgment. The people loved him, the powerful feared him. And yet, when Pope Alexander VI and political pressure mounted against him, his virtue couldn't protect him. Savonarola was burned in the same square where he had burned countless works of art he deemed sinful. His idealism had made him powerful, but his refusal to understand the darker mechanics of influence made him dead. These early experiences carved into my mind a fundamental truth. Power is the only protection for anything you value. Without it, your virtue is meaningless, your good intentions are irrelevant, and your noble goals die with you. The Republic meant nothing if it couldn't defend itself. Virtue meant nothing if virtuous men couldn't survive to practice it. Love meant nothing if loved leaders ended up in exile or graves. My father, a modest lawyer, believed in the power of law and justice. I watched him navigate Florence's complex legal system with integrity and skill. He was respected, even admired. But when political winds shifted, respect didn't protect our family from financial struggles. Admiration didn't open doors that political connections could have opened effortlessly. His goodness was authentic, but authenticity without strategic thinking is a luxury only the powerless can afford. Florence taught me that human nature has 2 levels: what people say they value, and what they actually respond to. Everyone claimed to love justice, but they followed strength. Everyone praised mercy, but they remembered severity. Everyone spoke of serving the common good, but they acted on personal interest. The disconnect between public rhetoric and private behavior wasn't hypocrisy, was the fundamental condition of human existence. By the time I reached adulthood, I had learned to study what worked rather than what should work. This distinction would define everything I discovered about power. During my years serving the Florentine Republic, I wrote countless letters to Francesco Vettor, my friend and confidant. In those private correspondences, I confessed something that would horrify the idealists, but liberate anyone seeking to understand power. Humans are fundamentally driven by self-interest, fear, and an insatiable hunger for control. This isn't cynicism, it's the foundation upon which all effective leadership must be built. I discovered this truth through careful observation, not philosophical speculation. When the French invaded Italy, I watched Italian princes abandon their allies the moment a better offer appeared. When Pope Julius II formed the League of Cambrai against Venice, I saw how quickly eternal friendships dissolved when was at stake. When Cesare Borgia swept through the Romagna, I witnessed how nobles who had sworn loyalty to their subjects immediately pledged allegiance to whoever held the strongest sword. The mistake most people make is believing that others share their moral constraints. They project their own conscience onto those around them, assuming that loyalty, gratitude, and principle guide human behavior. This assumption destroys them. The successful leader understands that every person operates from three core motivations: the desire for gain, the fear of loss, and the need to feel superior to others. Fear, I learned, is more reliable than love, because it depends on something you control rather than something you hope for. When people love you, their affection relies on your continued ability to make them happy, an exhausting and ultimately impossible standard. But when people fear you, their compliance depends only on their belief in your power to harm them. Love is fickle and depends on mood. Fear is constant and depends on calculation. This doesn't mean you should be cruel for cruelty's sake. The art lies in understanding when each emotion serves your purposes. I observed that Lorenzo de' Medici was loved for his patronage of arts and feared for his swift punishment of enemies. The combination made him nearly invincible. Those who tried to rule through love alone, like the naive idealists, found themselves betrayed when times grew difficult. Those who ruled through fear alone, like some of the more brutal tyrants, created such resentment that they lived in constant danger of assassination. The hunger for superiority explains why people will often work against their own material interests to gain status or inflict humiliation on rivals. I watched minor nobles bankrupt themselves to maintain appearances of wealth. I saw merchants destroy profitable partnerships over perceived slights to their dignity. Understanding this drive allows you to motivate people through titles, recognition, and the promise of elevated status often more effectively than through money. Most importantly, I learned that loyalty is never absolute, it's always conditional. The conditions might be emotional, financial, or social, but they always exist. The leader who ignores this truth will be destroyed by it. The leader who accepts it can work within these constraints to build something approximating reliable allegiance. People are not evil, but they are predictably so. They will honor their commitments when doing so serves their interests, and they will break them when breaking them offers greater advantage. This isn't a character flaw to be corrected, it's human nature to be managed. Once you accept this reality, you can stop wasting energy on disappointment and start channeling human nature toward productive ends. The leader who understands these truths can create systems where people's self-interest aligns with the common good. This is the only sustainable foundation for power. Cesare Borgia understood something that escapes most leaders. The public face and the private calculation must be different, but they must never contradict each other. When I served as diplomatic envoy to his court, I watched him master what I came to call the essential duality of power, appearing virtuous while thinking strategically, projecting strength while maintaining flexibility, inspiring confidence while planning for every contingency. The portrait painters always depicted Cesare in magnificent robes, his expression noble and serene. But I saw him in private councils, where his mind worked like a calculating machine, weighing every option. For its practical advantage, this wasn't hypocrisy, was the sophisticated understanding that people need to believe in virtue, even when they respond to force. Most leaders fail because they choose one face or the other. The purely virtuous leader maintains moral consistency, but lacks the flexibility to handle complex realities. When Piero Soderini led Florence, his commitment to republican ideals was admirable, but his inability to make hard decisions when the Republic faced existential threats ultimately led to its downfall. He couldn't reconcile his values with the brutal choices leadership sometimes demands. The purely calculating leader, on the other hand, achieves short-term goals but fails to inspire lasting loyalty. Oliverato da Fermo seized power in his city through brilliant tactical maneuvering, but his obvious ruthlessness made everyone around him constantly plot his destruction. He ruled through fear alone, without the legitimacy that comes from appearing to serve higher principles. Caesar's genius lay in understanding that the appearance of virtue is often more important than virtue itself, while the reality of strength is always more important than the appearance of strength. He publicly championed justice and order while privately eliminating threats with surgical precision. People could admire his stated principles while respecting his demonstrated power. The key is ensuring that your public virtue and private calculations serve the same ultimate goal. When Cesare conquered the Romagna, he publicly positioned himself as a liberator, freeing the people from corrupt local tyrants. This gave moral justification for actions that were fundamentally about expanding his territory. The public story and the private strategy pointed in the same direction, making both more powerful. I learned that the most effective leaders cultivate specific virtues that enhance their strategic position while quietly setting aside virtues that would compromise their effectiveness. Caesar was genuinely generous to those who served him loyally. It wasn't performance, but a calculated investment in future loyalty. He was genuinely decisive in crisis. This wasn't acting, but the recognition that hesitation in leadership creates more problems than bold action. However, he had no qualms about breaking promises to enemies or eliminating threats before they fully materialized. He understood that some traditional virtues, like always keeping your word or always giving people the benefit of the doubt, are luxuries that effective leaders cannot afford. The art lies in choosing which virtues to embody genuinely and which to simulate skillfully. You must be authentically virtuous in ways that strengthen your position and strategically virtuous in ways that protect it. This requires constant judgment about what each situation demands. Your followers need to believe that you serve something greater than yourself. This belief gives them permission to follow you and justifies the sacrifices you ask them to make. But you must privately serve the practical requirements of maintaining power, because without power, your service to higher principles becomes meaningless. The leader who masters this duality can inspire people to follow noble visions while making the hard choices necessary to achieve them. This isn't corruption of virtue, it's the sophisticated application of virtue to a complex world, where pure idealism leads to pure failure. The two faces of leadership aren't contradiction there. Complementary tools for achieving lasting influence. Pope Alexander VI was perhaps the most skilled reader of human motivation I ever encountered. During my diplomatic missions to Rome, I watched him navigate the treacherous politics of the papal court by understanding not what people said they wanted, but what they actually needed, feared, and desired. His analysis of human nature was so precise that he could predict behavior with mathematical accuracy. The Pope taught me that every person operates from three core drives, though they rarely acknowledge these motivations, even to themselves. First, the drive for security, the need to protect what they have and ensure their survival. Second, the drive for advancement, the hunger to gain more power, wealth, status, or influence than they currently possess. Third, the drive for need to feel important, respected, and superior to others in some meaningful way. Most people's public statements reflect what they believe they should want rather than what they actually want. A cardinal might speak passionately about spiritual matters, while his true concern is maintaining his family's political influence. A merchant might advocate for fair trade, while his real goal is eliminating competition. A noble might champion justice, while his primary motivation is revenge against those who have slighted him. Alexander Vi showed me how to identify these hidden motivations through careful observation. Watch what people do when they think no one important is looking. Notice what topics make them most animated usually. These touch on their deepest concerns. Pay attention to what they avoid discussing, as this often reveals their greatest vulnerabilities. Observe who they choose to associate with and who they carefully avoid. Learn to listen for the emotional undertones beneath rational arguments. When someone presents a logical case for a particular course of action, ask yourself what emotional need this action would satisfy for them. The logic is often constructed afterward to justify what they already want for personal reasons. Body, language, and timing reveal more than words. Alexander Vi could read a room like a scholar reads a text. He noticed when someone's attention sharpened, when their breathing changed, when they unconsciously leaned forward or pulled back. These physical responses betrayed their true interests, even when their words suggested indifference. The Pope also understood that people's motivations follow predictable patterns based on their circumstances. A rising noble is driven primarily by advancement. They want to climb higher and will take significant risks to do so. An established noble is driven primarily by security. They want to protect their position and will sacrifice advancement for stability. A declining noble is driven by significance. They want to maintain their dignity and will make decisions based on pride rather than practical benefit. Financial pressure creates desperation that overrides normal moral constraints. Political uncertainty makes people crave strong leadership, even if it costs them freedom. Social humiliation drives people to seek revenge, often at great personal cost. Understanding these psychological states allows you to predict how different people will respond to various pressures and opportunities. I discovered that the most dangerous people are those whose public motivations and private motivations align perfectly. These individuals have no internal conflict between what they say and what they want, making them both more effective and more difficult to manipulate. Alexander VI was precisely this type of person. His public role as Pope and his private ambitions for his family's power pointed in the same direction, making him extraordinarily formidable. The key to reading motivations accurately is setting aside your own moral judgments. Don't waste time being shocked or disappointed by people's self-interest. Instead, study it clinically, like a physician studying anatomy. Understanding doesn't require approval, but approval often prevents understanding. Most importantly, I learned that motivations change as circumstances change. The ally who served you faithfully when they needed your protection may become an enemy when they feel secure enough to pursue independent goals. The rival who opposed you when they felt threatened may become an ally when they face a greater threat from elsewhere. Effective leaders constantly reassess the motivational landscape around them. They understand that today's friend may be tomorrow's enemy, not because of character flaws, but because of shifting circumstances that create new incentive structures. This isn't paranoia, it's practical psychology applied to the complex dynamics of power. Asterisk. Lorenzo de' Medici survived the Pazzi conspiracy not just through luck, but through his masterful understanding of when to inspire fear and when to bestow favor. In the aftermath of the assassination attempt, I watched him orchestrate a response that would define my understanding of power's most delicate balance. He demonstrated that being feared is indeed safer than being loved, but only when that fear is carefully calibrated to avoid breeding hatred. The morning after the attack, Lorenzo faced a choice that would determine his survival. He could respond with measured justice or overwhelming terror. Instead, he chose something more sophisticated: strategic brutality followed by calculated mercy. The conspirators and their immediate supporters were hunted down and executed publicly, their bodies displayed as a message that could not be misunderstood. But Lorenzo also pardoned many who had been peripheral to the plot, demonstrating that his anger had limits and his forgiveness was possible. This taught me that fear without hope creates desperate enemies, while favor without consequences creates entitled allies. The most effective leaders cultivate both emotions simultaneously in different people, creating a complex emotional ecosystem that serves their interests. Fear works because it's based on calculation rather than emotion. When people fear you, they think carefully before acting against you. They weigh the consequences, consider the odds, and usually choose caution. Love, by contrast, is emotional and therefore unstable. People who love you today may hate you tomorrow if you disappoint them, but people who fear you will continue to fear you as long as your power remains credible. However, the type of fear matters enormously. You want people to fear your power, not your unpredictability. Lorenzo's enemies feared his ability to destroy them, but they didn't fear that he would destroy them capriciously. This distinction is crucial because predictable power feels controllable to those who submit to it, while unpredictable power feels threatening even to allies. I learned that favor becomes most powerful when it's unexpected and unearned. Lorenzo would occasionally grant significant benefits to people who had opposed him, but only after they had submitted and demonstrated their acceptance of his authority. This created profound psychological impact because it showed that his mercy was a choice, not a weakness, and that submission to him could be rewarded. The timing of fear and favor creates their effectiveness. Fear administered immediately after a challenge establishes consequences. Favor granted after submission is established, creates gratitude and hope. The sequence matters because mercy shown before dominance is established looks like weakness, while terror applied after submission is secured looks like cruelty. Lorenzo also understood that both fear and favor must be proportional to be effective. Excessive punishment for minor offenses creates resentment among observers who might face similar treatment. Excessive rewards for small favors creates expectations that become expensive to maintain. The art lies in calibrating your responses to maximize psychological impact while minimizing long-term costs. I observed that the most successful leaders create clear rules about what earns favor and what triggers fear, then apply these rules consistently. This allows people to feel they have some control over their treatment, which paradoxically makes them more willing to submit to your authority. They can choose cooperation and earn benefits, or choose opposition and face consequences. The ultimate goal is creating an environment where people want to please you, not just from fear of punishment, but from hope of reward. This requires demonstrating that cooperation brings genuine benefits while opposition brings certain costs. When you achieve this balance, people police themselves and each other, making your power more efficient and sustainable. Fear and favor are not opposing strategies. They're complementary tools that reinforce each other when used skillfully. Venice built an empire not through superior armies, but through superior information networks. During my diplomatic missions, I studied their intelligence system with the fascination of a scholar examining a perfect machine. The Venetians understood that knowledge is the ultimate weapon because it allows you to strike at the perfect moment, defend against threats before they materialize, and position yourself advantageously in every negotiation. Information creates power through three mechanisms. It reveals opportunities that others miss, It exposes vulnerabilities that others try to hide, and it allows you to control the narrative that shapes how others perceive reality. The Venetians mastered all three, which is why their merchant republic dominated the Mediterranean for centuries despite lacking the military might of their competitors. I learned that the most valuable information is not what everyone knows, but what only you know. Public knowledge has no strategic value because your competitors can access it as easily as you can. The Venetians invested heavily in gathering intelligence that their rivals couldn't. Obtain private conversations between foreign diplomats, secret financial arrangements between competing merchants, and personal scandals involving powerful political figures. Creating information dependencies in others multiplies your influence exponentially. When people need what you know to make important decisions, they become partially dependent on your goodwill. The Venetians would share certain intelligence freely to establish their credibility, then strategically withhold crucial details to maintain their advantage. Recipients learned that cooperation with Venice brought access to valuable information, while opposition meant operating in the dark. Strategic silence often communicates more than words. When the Venetians knew something damaging about a rival but chose not to reveal it immediately, the rival understood that this information existed and could be deployed at any time. This created ongoing leverage without requiring immediate confrontation. The threat of revelation often proved more powerful than revelation itself. They discovered that controlling the timing of information release determines its impact. The same fact revealed at different moments can strengthen your position or destroy it. The Venetians would sometimes sit on damaging intelligence for months, waiting for the moment when its revelation would have maximum strategic value. They understood that information is like a sword. Its power comes not from possessing it, but from wielding it at the right moment. Building networks that feed you intelligence while serving your interests requires careful cultivation of sources. The Venetians didn't just gather information, they created systematic relationships with people positioned to provide ongoing intelligence. They offered these sources benefits that were valuable but not obviously connected to intelligence gathering. Trade opportunities, political introductions, social advancement. The most sophisticated aspect of Venetian intelligence was their understanding that information flows in both directions. They didn't just gather intelligence about others, they carefully controlled what others learned about them. This meant creating multiple versions of the truth, what their enemies knew, what their allies knew, and what neutral parties knew. Each group received information calculated to produce behaviors that served Venetian interests. Modern leaders often underestimate information's power because they focus on obvious intelligence competitor strategies, market trends, political developments, but the most valuable information is often personal. Who has financial problems? Who is ambitious beyond their current position? Who harbors grudges? Who feels underappreciated? This human intelligence reveals the emotional and psychological pressures that drive decision-making. Information without analysis is merely data. The Venetians succeeded because they didn't just collect facts, they interpreted patterns, predicted consequences, and identified opportunities that these patterns revealed. When Cesare Borgia captured Imola, he faced a situation that would test everything I had learned about the psychology of power. The city had been ruled by a weak and corrupt governor whose mismanagement had created chaos, suffering, and resentment among the people. Cesare could have simply replaced the governor and hoped for gradual improvement, but he understood something more profound about human nature. Sometimes cruelty is the highest form of mercy. Instead of incremental reform, Cesare appointed Diorco, a man known for his ruthless efficiency, as his deputy. Diorco immediately imposed harsh discipline throughout the region. Corrupt officials were executed publicly. Bandits were hunted down without mercy. Citizens who violated public order faced swift and severe punishment. The measures were brutal, but they worked with startling speed. Within months, the Romagna was transformed from a lawless region into one of the most peaceful and prosperous areas in Italy. Trade flourished because merchants could travel safely. Agriculture improved because farmers could work without fear of banditry. Citizens could walk the streets at night without anxiety. The harsh medicine had cured a diseased body politic, but Cesare understood that prolonged harshness creates resentment even when it produces good results. Having used Deorco to establish order, he then had his deputy arrested, tried for excessive cruelty, and executed in the town square. The people, who had begun to chafe under Deorco's harsh rule, were suddenly grateful to Cesare for removing their oppressor. This single act accomplished 3 goals. It distanced Cesare from the unpopular measures that had been necessary. It demonstrated his justice to the people, and it showed his power to those who might challenge him. This taught me that effective leaders must sometimes do terrible things for good reasons, but they must also understand the psychology of how people process these actions. Swift severity that solves problems creates different emotional responses than gradual cruelty that perpetuates suffering. People can accept harsh measures if they see clear benefits and believe the harshness serves a purpose beyond the leaders. Personal satisfaction. The key distinction is between necessary cruelty and gratuitous cruelty. Necessary cruelty serves strategic goals, establishing order, preventing greater suffering, or eliminating genuine threats. Gratuitous cruelty serves emotional needs, revenge, sadism, or the desire to humiliate others. People instinctively recognize this difference, even if they can't articulate it clearly. I learned that the timing of harsh measures determines their effectiveness and their long-term consequences. Cruelty applied early in your reign, when expectations are still forming, creates different reactions than cruelty applied after you've established a reputation for benevolence. Early harshness can be seen as necessary for scene laying. Later harshness looks like character deterioration. The psychology of decisive action versus hesitation reveals why swift severity often prevents greater suffering. When leaders delay difficult decisions hoping for easier alternatives, problems typically worsen and eventually require even harsher solutions. The governor who hesitates to fire incompetent subordinates often ends up destroying entire departments. The parent who avoids disciplining bad behavior often faces much more serious problems. Later, Cesare also showed me that the most effective cruelty is surgical rather than widespread, targeting specific individuals who embody the problems you're trying to solve sends clear messages while avoiding the resentment that comes from mass punishment. When you eliminate key troublemakers decisively, others often reform their behavior voluntarily rather than risk similar treatment. The leader who understands necessary cruelty also understands when to stop applying it. Continued harshness after order is established transforms from medicine into poison. The skill lies in recognizing when your harsh measures have achieved their purpose and transitioning to more sustainable approaches. Most importantly, I discovered that leaders who refuse to apply necessary cruelty when situations demand it often end up causing more suffering than those who act decisively. The weak ruler who cannot bring himself to execute dangerous conspirators may end up presiding over civil wars that kill thousands. The merciful leader who cannot discipline corruption may watch his state collapse into chaos that destroys innocent lives. True compassion sometimes requires temporary ruthlessness to prevent permanent suffering. The Treaty of Cambrai revealed to me the true nature of all political relationships. They are temporary tactical arrangements that last only as long as they serve the interests of all parties involved. When Pope Julius II, Emperor Maximilian, King Louis XII of France, and Ferdinand of Aragon united against Venice in 1508, they called themselves allies and spoke of eternal friendship. Within 3 years, they were fighting each other with the same passion they had once directed against their common enemy. This taught me that permanent enemies and permanent friends exist only in fairy tales. In the real world of power, relationships shift based on changing circumstances, evolving threats, and new opportunities. The leader who understands this reality can navigate these shifts successfully, while the leader who believes in permanent loyalties will be destroyed by inevitable betrayals. Every alliance contains the seeds of its own destruction because success changes the power balance that made the alliance necessary. When the League of Cambrai succeeded in weakening Venice, each member suddenly faced a different strategic landscape. France had become too powerful in northern Italy, threatening the Pope's territorial ambitions. The Emperor's involvement gave him claims that conflicted with everyone else's goals. Spain's participation strengthened their position in a way that alarmed their former allies. I learned to read the expiration date on every alliance. By analyzing the incentive structures that created it, alliances formed to counter specific threats dissolve when those threats disappear or transform. Alliances based on mutual weakness often collapse when one party grows stronger. Alliances created to share benefits frequently break down when the benefits must be divided unequally. The art lies in positioning yourself to benefit from inevitable betrayals, rather than being destroyed by them. This requires maintaining flexible relationships with multiple parties and avoiding commitments that lock you into positions that may become disadvantageous. When I observed successful leaders navigating complex alliances, they always preserved options for realigning their loyalties when circumstances changed. Julius II demonstrated masterful alliance management by systematically betraying each of his partners at the optimal moment. He used France to defeat Venice, then turned against France when they became too powerful. He employed Spanish forces to counter French expansion, then maneuvered against Spain when they threatened Papal territories. Each betrayal was perfectly timed to maximize his strategic position, while minimizing the costs of switching sides. The psychology of betrayal requires understanding that people expect it, even when they don't admit it. Sophisticated political actors know that their allies will abandon them when abandonment becomes advantageous. This knowledge creates a strange form of mutual respect, based on shared understanding of the rules of the game. The betrayal that destroys relationships is the unexpected one when someone breaks faith earlier or more completely than anticipated. I discovered that the most dangerous moment in any alliance is when it achieves its stated goals. Success eliminates the common interest that bound the parties together and forces them to confront their underlying conflicts. Smart leaders begin preparing for post-victory competition while the alliance is still fighting for victory. The key to betraying first while maintaining plausible deniability lies in creating situations where your actions can be interpreted as responses to changed circumstances rather than premeditated treachery. Julius II never simply announced his intention to switch sides. He always pointed to new developments that justified his strategic realignments. Effective leaders also understand that how you betray someone affects your ability to form future alliances. Betrayal that appears driven by necessity maintains your reputation for rational calculation. Betrayal that appears driven by greed or spite makes others reluctant to trust you, even when cooperation would serve their interests. The ultimate skill is maintaining relationships with former allies, even after betraying them, because today's enemy often becomes tomorrow's ally when circumstances shift again. Power politics operates in cycles, and the leader who burns bridges eliminates future strategic options. During my years serving the Florentine Republic, I watched countless elections where citizens believed they were choosing their own destiny, while the real decisions had been made long before the votes were cast. The art of presenting options that all serve your interests while appearing democratic became one of my most valuable discoveries. about the psychology of influence. True masters of power understand that people need to feel they have chosen their path freely, even when that path has been carefully constructed to lead where you want them to go. The illusion of choice satisfies human dignity while ensuring your desired outcomes. This isn't manipulation, it's sophisticated leadership that honors people's need for autonomy while protecting them from decisions that would harm them or your larger goals. I learned this first by watching how Lorenzo de' Medici managed Florentine politics. When the city faced important decisions, Lorenzo would spend weeks before any formal discussion ensuring that the options presented to the council would all advance his interests. Just through different means, citizens could debate passionately and vote according to their conscience, but every possible outcome served his strategic vision. The key lies in controlling the framework within which choices are made, rather than trying to control the choices themselves. When you set the parameters of discussion, define the criteria for evaluation, and determine which options are considered viable, you guide the outcome without appearing to impose your will. Creating false dilemmas that lead to your desired outcome requires understanding how people process decisions. Most individuals, when faced with limited options, will focus on choosing among those options, rather than questioning whether better alternatives exist. Present three possibilities where two are clearly unacceptable and one serves your purposes, and people will feel they've made a free choice when they select your preferred option. The psychology of perceived autonomy reveals why this approach works better than direct command. When people believe they've chosen something freely, they become emotionally invested in that choice and will defend it against criticism. They become partners in your success rather than reluctant subjects of your authority. I observed that the most effective leaders frame decisions in terms of values rather than interests. Instead of asking which option benefits me most, they ask which option best serves our shared principles. This transforms self-interested calculation into moral reasoning, making people feel noble about choices that happen to serve your purposes. The timing of when options are presented affects how people evaluate them. Lorenzo would often introduce his preferred solution after allowing people to struggle with inadequate alternatives. By the time he revealed the option he actually wanted, it appeared as salvation rather than manipulation. Controlling the narrative around decision-making means shaping how people understand what's at stake. Frame choices as responses to external threats rather than internal preferences. Present your desired outcome as the responsible, mature, or patriotic option compared to alternatives that seem reckless or selfish. The most sophisticated application involves creating situations where people ask you to do what you were planning to do anyway. This requires patience and careful staging, but it transforms potential resistance into active support. Instead of imposing your will, you become the leader who responds to popular demand. When mastered properly, this approach creates genuine consensus around your objectives while maintaining the authentic participation that makes people feel valued and heard. Throughout my diplomatic career, I compiled detailed psychological assessments of every powerful person I encountered. These character profiles revealed a disturbing truth. Every leader, no matter how successful or intelligent, possessed exploitable flaws that could be used against them. The 7 deadly weaknesses that destroy even the most capable individuals are pride, greed, lust, envy, wrath, gluttony, and sloth, but their modern manifestations are far more sophisticated than their ancient names suggest. Pride manifests as the inability to admit error or accept counsel that contradicts your self-image. I watched brilliant leaders make catastrophic decisions because acknowledging better alternatives would require admitting they had been wrong. Duke Ludovico Sforza of Milan possessed exceptional political instincts, but his pride in his own cleverness led him to dismiss warnings about French intentions until it was too late to respond effectively. Ambition, when it becomes blind hunger for advancement, creates predictable vulnerabilities. Ambitious people will often sacrifice long-term security for short-term gains that appear to advance their position. They can be manipulated by dangling opportunities that seem to offer rapid progress toward their goals, even when those opportunities contain hidden traps. I discovered that the most dangerous weakness is the need to be seen as virtuous while acting from self-interest. This creates internal contradictions that cloud judgment and force people into increasingly complex rationalizations. Leaders who cannot acknowledge their own motivations honestly become vulnerable to those who can exploit the gap between their self-image and their behavior. Greed extends far beyond simple desire for money. It includes hunger for status, recognition, territory, or any form of expansion beyond current circumstances. The greedy are predictable because they will consistently choose more over better, quantity over quality, immediate gratification over strategic patience. Caesar's assassins exploited exactly this weakness, knowing he would not resist the opportunity to expand his power even when the risks were obvious. Lust, in its broader sense, means being controlled by desires rather than controlling them. This applies to sexual appetite, but also to the lust for revenge, the lust for glory, and the lust for immediate pleasure. People controlled by their desires make decisions based on satisfying those desires, rather than achieving strategic objectives, creating opportunities for those who can offer what they crave. Envy destroys rational calculation by making people focus on harming rivals rather than advancing their own interests. I watched capable leaders waste resources and opportunities, pursuing vendetta against those they envied, often to their own detriment. Envy makes people predictable because they will consistently choose actions that hurt their rivals, even when those actions also hurt themselves. Wrath, or the inability to control anger, creates two vulnerabilities. It makes people act impulsively when they should think strategically, and it makes them prioritize punishment over profit. Angry leaders can be manipulated by providing them with targets for their rage, redirecting their destructive energy toward your enemies rather than your interests. The most subtle weakness is intellectual pride, the conviction that your intelligence makes you superior to common human limitations. Highly intelligent people often believe they can think their way out of any problem, and are therefore less likely to prepare for contingencies or listen to warnings that contradict their analysis. I learned that the most effective approach to exploiting weaknesses is helping people rationalize bad decisions that serve your purposes. Instead of tempting them directly, provide them with sophisticated justifications for doing what their weaknesses already incline them toward. Smart people are particularly vulnerable to this because they need complex rationalizations to overcome their better judgment. The timing of when you exploit weaknesses determines whether you succeed or merely reveal your intentions. Strike when people are under pressure, facing deadlines, or dealing with multiple problems simultaneously. Stressed individuals rely more heavily on their habitual responses and are less likely to recognize manipulation. Understanding these weaknesses in others requires first acknowledging them in yourself. Leaders who cannot see their own vulnerabilities clearly will never develop the psychological insight necessary to recognize and exploit these same weaknesses in others. Self-knowledge is the foundation of all strategic psychology. When Pope Julius II planned his coronation ceremony, every detail was calculated to create psychological dominance over everyone who witnessed it. I studied these papal ceremonies with the fascination of a scholar examining the mechanics of influence, because I understood that spectacle often matters more than substance in establishing and maintaining power. The coronation was theater, but theater designed to alter reality by changing how people perceived the Pope's authority. The elaborate rituals, magnificent costumes, carefully choreographed movements. An overwhelming display of wealth created an emotional experience that bypassed rational analysis and spoke directly to people's instincts about hierarchy and submission. Human beings are visual creatures who make instant judgments based on appearance and presentation. Before anyone spoke to Julius II, they had already absorbed countless subtle messages about his power, status, and worthiness of respect. The ceremony was designed to make opposition seem not just difficult, but psychologically impossible. I learned that the psychology of ritual and symbolism operates below the level of conscious thought. When people participate in ceremonies that require them to bow, kneel, or demonstrate deference, they are not just acknowledging your authority, they are physically conditioning themselves to feel subordinate. The body teaches the mind how to feel, and repeated physical submission creates psychological submission. The use of environment and staging to establish hierarchy extends far beyond formal ceremonies. Every interaction takes place within a physical context that either reinforces or undermines your authority. Julius II understood this, which is why audiences with him took place in magnificent chambers, designed to overwhelm visitors with their scale and grandeur. When you control the physical environment, you control subtle psychological factors that influence how people respond to you. Height differences matter. Speaking to someone from an elevated position creates psychological advantage. Lighting affects mood and perception. Dramatic lighting can make ordinary conversations feel momentous. Even seating arrangements communicate power, relationships, and can influence the dynamics of negotiations. The timing of dramatic entrances and exits shapes how people remember interactions. Julius II would often arrive after others had been waiting, creating anticipation and emphasizing his importance. He would leave before conversations reached natural conclusions, maintaining control over the rhythm of discourse and ensuring that others remained focused on gaining his attention. Creating awe and intimidation through presentation requires understanding that people want to believe in something greater than themselves. The magnificent display wasn't just showing off wealth, it was providing people with an object worthy of their reverence. Humans have a psychological need to admire and submit to something magnificent, and effective leaders provide that magnificence. Observed that the most sophisticated leaders use spectacle strategically rather than constantly. Overwhelming display loses its impact if people become accustomed to it. So the wise leader alternates between magnificent presentations and more intimate interactions. This creates contrast that makes both approaches more effective. The danger of theatrical power lies in believing your own performance. Leaders who become so invested in their image that they lose touch with underlying realities often find that their spectacular facades collapse when facing genuine challenges. The theater must serve strategic purposes, not become an end in itself. Modern applications of these principles work through the same psychological mechanisms. The executive who controls meeting environments, the politician who stages compelling events, the leader who understands that perception shapes reality, all are applying lessons that Renaissance princes learned through necessity. The ultimate goal of theatrical power is creating emotional experiences that make your authority feel natural and inevitable, rather than imposed and artificial. When people feel genuinely impressed rather than obviously manipulated, they become willing participants in maintaining your elevated status. Lorenzo the Magnificent possessed a political manual that I studied extensively during my years in Florence. His personal notes revealed the delicate art of ascending to power while neutralizing potential threats, a skill that determined whether ambitious individuals achieved their goals or found themselves destroyed by the envy and fear their success created in others. The greatest danger during any rise to power is moving so quickly that you create more enemies than allies. Rapid ascension triggers protective instincts in those who see their relative position declining. Lorenzo understood that each step upward must be accompanied by strategies to manage the resentment and fear that success inevitably generates in others. I learned that the key to managing envy during your climb lies in making your advancement appear inevitable rather than aggressive. When your rise seems like a natural consequence of circumstances beyond your control, people are less likely to take it personally or organize opposition against you. Lorenzo often positioned his increasing influence as reluctant acceptance of responsibilities thrust upon him by others, rather than ambitious grabbing for power. Building a reputation that protects you from attacks requires careful cultivation of your public image during the vulnerable period of ascension. Lorenzo invested heavily in being seen as generous, cultured, and devoted to Florence's welfare. This created psychological barriers to opposing him. Attacking Lorenzo meant attacking someone who embodied the city's highest values. The timing of when you reveal your full capabilities determines how others respond to your growing power. Displaying too much competence too early makes people recognize you as a threat before you've built sufficient protection. Lorenzo initially presented himself as a talented young man who was still learning, which made him appear less threatening, while he quietly built his network of supporters and obligations. Managing relationships with those you surpass during your rise requires particular delicacy. Former peers who find themselves left behind can become dangerous enemies because they understand your capabilities and weaknesses better than anyone. Lorenzo addressed this by finding meaningful roles for displaced rivals, creating the impression that everyone was rising together rather than that he was rising at their expense. I discovered that the most effective strategy for neutralizing potential opposition is making your success benefit others rather than threatening them. Lorenzo used his growing influence to advance his supporters' interests, making opposition to him personally costly for those who had benefited from his rise. People who profit from your advancement become invested in protecting your position. The psychology of legitimacy becomes crucial during rapid ascension. People need reasons to justify accepting your elevated status that go beyond mere acknowledgement of your power. Lorenzo cultivated legitimacy through his patronage of arts and learning, his mediation of disputes, and his representation of Florentine interests in foreign affairs. Creating multiple sources of protection prevents any single group from having the power to destroy you. Lorenzo built relationships with foreign powers, cultivated popular support through public works, maintained alliances with other powerful families, and ensured that his economic activities made him valuable to numerous constituencies. The ultimate goal is reaching a position where attacking you requires attacking the entire system that supports you. When your interests become intertwined with the interests of multiple powerful groups, opposition to you becomes opposition to a coalition rather than opposition to an individual, dramatically increasing the costs and difficulty of successful challenges to your authority. The Medici banking ledgers revealed the most sophisticated power network I ever studied. These financial records showed how the family used debt and favor to control European royalty. But their true genius lay in understanding that giving favors is far more powerful than receiving them. Through strategic generosity, they created webs of obligation that made them indispensable to the most powerful people in Europe. Traditional thinking suggests that owing money or favors to others makes you dependent on them. The Medici proved the opposite. When others owe you significant debts, they become dependent on your goodwill for their continued prosperity or even survival. The debtor must constantly consider your interests in their decision-making, while the creditor maintains freedom of action. I learned that the psychology of obligation operates through guilt, gratitude, and fear of losing future support. When you provide someone with substantial benefits, especially during their time of need, you create emotional debt that goes beyond any material calculation. People feel obligated to consider your interests, because failing to do so would force them to see themselves as ungrateful or dishonorable. The most powerful obligations are those that cannot be easily repaid. When you provide someone with opportunities they couldn't have obtained elsewhere, solve problems they couldn't solve themselves, or offer support during crises when others abandon them, you create lasting psychological bonds. These favors are remembered for years and influence countless future decisions. Creating webs of mutual dependence requires strategic thinking about how to make yourself valuable to multiple powerful people simultaneously. The Medici didn't just lend money, they provided access to international markets, facilitated political introductions, offered financial expertise, and created opportunities for their clients to advance their own interests. Each service made the recipient more dependent on Medici support. I discovered that the timing of when you provide favors determines their psychological impact. Assistance offered during someone's moment of weakness or crisis creates far deeper obligation than help provided during times of strength. The Medici would often extend credit or political support precisely when their clients faced their greatest difficulties, ensuring maximum gratitude and future loyalty. The art of making yourself indispensable to powerful people lies in identifying what they need that only you can provide. This might be specialized knowledge, unique connections, financial resources, or simply the willingness to take risks that others avoid. The Medici studied their clients carefully to understand their vulnerabilities and ambitions, then positioned themselves as essential partners in achieving important goals. Building networks of obligation also requires managing the psychology of the favors you grant. Benefits that appear to come easily to you but solve serious problems for recipients create the strongest bonds. The Medici would often downplay the costs or risks of their assistance while emphasizing how much their help meant to the recipient's success. I observed that the most sophisticated practitioners create obligation networks where their clients also become obligated to each other. When you facilitate relationships between powerful people, you become the central node in their interactions. They remain connected to each other through their shared connection to you, making you valuable to the entire network rather than just individual members. The ultimate goal is creating situations where others' success depends on your continued prosperity and influence. When multiple powerful people have invested their reputations, resources, or political positions in relationships with you, they become stakeholders in protecting your status. Attacking you becomes attacking their own interests. Modern applications of these principles work through the same psychological mechanisms, making yourself valuable through unique capabilities, providing assistance during crucial moments, and creating networks where your success serves others' interests. The specific methods change, but the underlying psychology of obligation remains constant across centuries. The Battle of Ravenna taught me that victory depends more on timing than strength. I studied the military documents from this engagement obsessively because they revealed principles that apply to every form of conflict, whether military, political, or personal. The commander who strikes at the perfect moment with adequate force defeats the commander who strikes at the wrong moment with superior force. Reading the signs of opportunity and vulnerability requires understanding that most people telegraph their weaknesses long before they become apparent to casual observers. Financial pressure creates desperation that makes people accept deals they would normally reject. Political uncertainty makes leaders crave support and willing to pay higher prices for loyalty. Personal crisis makes individuals vulnerable to influence they would usually resist. I learned to identify these moments by watching for changes in behavior patterns rather than listening to public statements. When powerful people begin seeking advice they previously dismissed, when they start making concessions they previously refused, when they begin reaching out to contacts they previously ignored, these are signals that their position has weakened and opportunities may exist. The psychology of the perfect moment involves understanding that windows of opportunity open and close according to forces beyond your control. External pressures, competing priorities, and shifting circumstances create brief periods when actions that are normally impossible become achievable. The skilled leader watches for these windows and prepares to act decisively when they appear. Patience is often the highest form of aggression because it allows you to strike when success is most likely rather than when you are most eager. I watched Caesar Borgia spend months positioning himself for the conquest of specific territories, waiting for the perfect combination of circumstances. His enemies distracted by other threats, his allies committed to supporting him, his resources at their peak, and his target at its weakest. Preparing for opportunities while simultaneously creating them requires a sophisticated understanding of cause and effect in complex systems. You cannot simply wait for perfect moments. You must work to engineer circumstances that make perfect moments more likely to occur. This means influencing the factors that create opportunities, applying pressure to potential targets, building capabilities you might need, and positioning yourself to act quickly when chances arise. The art of recognizing when your opponent is overextended, distracted, or facing internal conflicts allows you to strike when they cannot respond effectively. Ravenna was won because the French forces attacked when their enemies were dealing with multiple problems simultaneously: supply difficulties, communication breakdowns, and leadership disputes that prevented coordinated response. I discovered that the most effective timing involves striking just after your opponent has committed resources to other objectives. When someone has invested heavily in one direction, they become vulnerable from other directions because they cannot easily redirect their efforts. This is why Borgia often launched his most important campaigns immediately after his targets had committed forces to different conflicts. Understanding the rhythm of decision-making in complex organizations reveals when influence attempts are most likely to succeed. People are most receptive to new ideas immediately after experiencing failure with old approaches during periods of uncertainty when they're seeking guidance, and when facing deadlines that require rapid decisions with incomplete information. The psychology of momentum means that small successes at the right moment can cascade into larger victories, while premature actions can trigger defensive responses that make future success more difficult. Timing your initial moves to build momentum rather than seeking immediate complete victory often leads to better long-term outcomes. I learned that the perfect moment often feels imperfect to those experiencing it because it involves uncertainty and risk. The clarity that makes timing appear obvious only becomes apparent in retrospect. This means that effective leaders must be willing to act on incomplete information when the available signals suggest opportunity. The ultimate skill is creating multiple opportunities simultaneously so that if one perfect moment passes, others remain available. This requires maintaining several different initiatives at various stages of development, allowing you to advance whichever opportunity develops most favorably while keeping alternatives ready for future deployment. Timing separates the adequate leader from the exceptional one more than any other factor. The intelligence reports detailing Cesare Borgia's purge of his own inner circle revealed the most chilling truth about power. Your closest allies pose the greatest danger because they understand your methods, know your weaknesses, and have the access necessary to destroy you. When Cesare eliminated trusted lieutenants who had served him faithfully for years, he wasn't acting from paranoia. He was responding to the mathematical certainty that proximity to power creates ambition for power. I learned that loyalty has a natural lifespan that expires as circumstances change. The subordinate who was grateful for your patronage when they were weak becomes resentful of your authority when they grow strong. The ally who needed your protection when they faced external threats begins to see you as an obstacle when those threats disappear. This isn't moral failure, it's the predictable evolution of human relationships under the pressures of power. Identifying when loyalty becomes threat requires watching for subtle shifts in behavior that precede open challenge. Trusted associates begin questioning your decisions more frequently, taking credit for successes more aggressively, or building independent relationships that don't serve your interests. These early warning signs appear long before actual betrayal, giving you time to respond strategically. The psychology of succession and replacement creates inevitable tensions within any power structure. Ambitious subordinates naturally begin positioning themselves to inherit or usurp your position, especially if they believe they could perform your role more effectively. This process accelerates when you show any signs of weakness, distraction, or reduced capability. César's genius lay in understanding that preventing internal threats requires periodic renewal of your inner circle. Keeping the same people in positions of trust for too long allows them to develop the knowledge, relationships, and confidence necessary to challenge you. Strategic replacement of key personnel, even when they haven't shown obvious signs of disloyalty, prevents the accumulation of dangerous capabilities in potential rivals. I discovered that the most dangerous internal threats come from those who believe they understand your methods well enough to improve upon them. Intelligent subordinates who have observed your decision-making process often develop confidence that they could achieve better results using different approaches. This intellectual pride makes them particularly dangerous because they justify their ambitions through criticism of your leadership. Managing succession fears while maintaining motivation in ambitious subordinates requires careful balance. You must provide enough opportunity for advancement to keep talented people engaged, while ensuring that none of them accumulate enough independent power to threaten your position. This often means creating multiple potential successors who check each other's ambitions rather than allowing any single person to emerge as your obvious heir. The art of elimination without creating martyrs involves ensuring that removed individuals appear to have failed rather than been victimized. Cesare would often create situations where disloyal subordinates made obvious mistakes or revealed their treacherous intentions publicly before he acted against them. This protected his reputation while justifying harsh measures. I learned that maintaining power while surrounded by ambitious subordinates requires constant intelligence about their activities, relationships, and private conversations. You must know who they're talking to, what they're promising, and how they're positioning themselves for advancement. This information allows you to intervene before challenges become serious threats. The ultimate principle is accepting that betrayal by trusted associates is inevitable rather than preventable. The leader who prepares for this reality by maintaining multiple sources of support, avoiding excessive dependence on any individual, and developing systems that can function despite personnel changes, will survive the betrayals that destroy leaders who believe in permanent loyalty. Power corrupts not because it makes people evil, but because it makes loyalty temporary and ambition eternal. 5 centuries have passed since I walked the corridors of Florentine power. Yet, as I observe your contemporary world, I am struck by how little has truly changed. The technologies are different, the scale is larger, but the fundamental dynamics of human nature and organizational behavior remain precisely as I documented them in Renaissance Italy. Your modern corporations mirror the Italian city-states I knew so well. The ambitious vice president maneuvering for the CEO position employs the same strategies I watched Cesare Borgia use to conquer the Romagna. The board member building coalitions against current leadership follows patterns I observed in Florentine council chambers. The startup founder eliminating co-founders who become liabilities applies principles that Lorenzo de' Medici perfected 500 years ago. The information networks that gave Venice its commercial empire have evolved into your digital surveillance capabilities, but the strategic principles remain identical. Corporate intelligence gathering, social media monitoring, and data analytics serve the same functions as the Venetian spy networks I studied. The ability to gather, analyze, and strategically deploy information still determines who holds power, and who merely thinks they do. Your political campaigns demonstrate that the theater of power I observed in papal ceremonies translates perfectly to modern media. The candidate who controls image, timing, and narrative still defeats the candidate with better policies but inferior presentation. The psychological principles that made Julius II's coronations effective now make political rallies, corporate presentations, and social media campaigns successful. I see my teachings about fear and favor reflected in every modern management structure. The executive who balances consequences with rewards. The political leader who combines strength with mercy. The entrepreneur who inspires both respect and loyalty, or applying lessons I learned from watching the Medici navigate Renaissance politics. The alliance structures I analyzed in treaties like Cambrai now appear in your business partnerships, political coalitions, and international agreements. The same forces that made those historical alliances temporary make your contemporary alliances equally fragile. The executive who understands that business partnerships have expiration dates. The politician who prepares for shifting loyalties. The leader who positions themselves for inevitable betrayals. These people have internalized truths about human nature that I documented centuries ago. Your organizational hierarchies face identical challenges to the courts I studied. The problem of ambitious subordinates plotting advancement. The difficulty of maintaining loyalty among capable associates. The need to eliminate internal threats without creating instability. These challenges haven't disappeared with modern human resources, departments, and corporate governance structures. What has changed is the speed at which these dynamics operate and the scale at which they play out. Decisions that once affected city-states now impact global markets. Information that once traveled at the speed of horses now spreads instantaneously. Alliances that once involved a few dozen powerful families now include multinational corporations and international governments. But the psychological principles remain constant because human nature remains constant. People still want security, advancement, and significance. They still respond to fear and favor, still make decisions based on self-interest, dressed as principle, still form alliances of convenience that dissolve when circumstances change. The leader who understands that technology changes tactics, but not human nature, will always have advantages over those who believe that modern innovations have somehow transcended the fundamental realities of power, influence, and organizational behavior that I documented in simpler times. As I prepare to leave you with these insights, I must share the final letter I never sent, one that explains the burden and responsibility that comes with understanding power's true nature. Knowledge of these principles transforms you permanently, and transformation, once begun, cannot be reversed. Seeing power clearly means abandoning comfortable illusions about human nature and political relationships. You can no longer believe that good intentions alone produce good results, that virtue, without strength, can protect what you value, or that people will consistently choose principle over self. This clarity is simultaneously liberating and isolating because it separates you from those who still operate under more naive assumptions. The burden of understanding these principles lies in recognizing that you now have responsibility for how you use them. Power is morally neutral. It amplifies whatever intentions drive it. The same techniques that Caesar Borgia used to bring order to the Romagna could be used to create chaos and oppression. The choice of how to apply these insights reveals your character more clearly than any philosophical statements about your values. I have shown you the dark psychology of power, not to make you cruel, but to make you effective in serving purposes larger than yourself. The leader who understands human weakness can protect people from the consequences of their own worst impulses. The person who comprehends political reality can build institutions that channel self-interest toward constructive ends. The individual who grasps influence can use it to achieve goals that pure idealism cannot reach. Using dark psychology for constructive purposes requires constant vigilance about your own motivations. The techniques I have taught you will work, regardless of whether your goals are selfish or noble. But only you can ensure that your power serves something greater than your personal ambition. This requires regular, honest examination of whether your actions genuinely serve the people and principles you claim to represent. The wisdom to wield influence responsibly comes from remembering that power is a tool, not a destination. The moment you begin enjoying manipulation for its own sake, delighting in others' submission, or using influence primarily to satisfy your ego, you have become exactly the type of person these techniques were designed to defeat. My final advice is this: master these principles completely, but apply them selectively. Not every situation requires the full arsenal of political psychology. Sometimes straightforward honesty is more effective than sophisticated manipulation. Sometimes genuine virtue serves your purposes better than calculated appearance of virtue. The highest skill lies in knowing when to employ which approach. You now possess knowledge that has shaped empires and toppled kingdoms. You understand human nature at its most fundamental level. You can read motivations others cannot see, influence outcomes others cannot control, and navigate complexity others cannot comprehend. Use this knowledge wisely. The world has enough tyrants. It needs more leaders who understand power well enough to use it for purposes that transcend their own immediate interests. This is my legacy to you, not the corruption of innocence, but the sophisticated pursuit of noble goals through realistic means.